Hello, and you're very welcome to episode 75 of The Fifth Court, a podcast on legal affairs presented by myself, Peter Leonard, barrister and mediator.
And myself, Mark Tottenham, barrister and editor of Decisis Law Reports.
Mark, good to see you as always. This week we are on the road again, and this time the Fifth Court pitched up at the Solicitor's Growth Conference, and that took place in Lawler's Hotel in Naas. And our guest on that occasion, he didn't disappoint either. Tonight we're going to bring you barrister Joe Brolly. People will be very familiar with his sporting prowess and I suppose his outspoken commentary. But we have to remember, by trade, he is a barrister. He's one of us, Mark. And that's what we tried to focus on. Now, maybe we strayed off a little bit, but it was a very enjoyable interview.
I think we have to say that the interview took place the day after the verdict was given in the Stardust inquests, which both Joe Brolly and myself were involved in. And he made a few comments about that, which we've decided to leave in.
Okay, good. But first, to three cases that you have identified from the Decisis website. We start with a bankruptcy case, and the standard period of bankruptcy, I think these days, Mark, you know more about this than me, is 1 year, but it can be extended due to non-cooperation and the failure to disclose assets and not being, a good faith person. And that's maybe an issue in this case. You're going to tell us about it. This is the matter of KJ, a bankrupt, and it was a decision of Ms. Justice Pilkington in the Court of Appeal.
That's correct. So, as you say, normally these days, bankruptcy is quite a relatively brief summary process, you might almost say. But it used to be several years, but now I think it's just down to 1 year. But in this particular case, there was an issue of non-disclosure in relation to a property in Thailand. And what happened was that Mr. KJ, he's not given his full name, initially tried to suggest that he just had a timeshare interest in this property, that it wasn't worth very much. And then it turned out that this property was held through a company, and there's an involvement in the British Virgin Islands. So as soon as you start seeing that kind of thing, you start to ask questions, I think. And it appears that he had a greater interest than he had initially disclosed to the official assignee in bankruptcy. And in the circumstances, the High Court extended the bankruptcy for another 4.5 years.
Wow.
And this was upheld by the Court of Appeal.
Okay, so the moral of the story is tell the truth.
Tell the truth to the official assignee.
The truth.
Exactly.
Tell all. Okay, next to the potentially thorny issue of enduring power of attorney legislation. In this case, the registration of the enduring power of attorney was upheld despite objections from family members on the basis of medical evidence. This is the case of EM versus MM and a decision of Mr. Justice Heslin.
That's right. And this is a case where the donor of the enduring power of attorney had been medically assessed, and it was held that she didn't have sufficient capacity to manage her own affairs, which is the test. So it wasn't only the family members, it was the donor herself who objected to this registration. And she basically said that she was having a bad day the day that she was assessed, and tried to resist the matter being registered. The problem, obviously, with an EPA or EPOA, as people often call them, is that you're basically giving control of the financial affairs to another family member, and that could be very hard for the person. And so, but despite the fact that she objected, the court was satisfied that the assessment had been correct, that it was scientifically based, but using a mini mental state examination, and that the expert evidence that she tried to put forward was based on a much more general description of her welfare and her state of mind, rather than using the MMSE that was used by the initial doctor.
Very good, very good. Well, finally, to a child abduction case where the High Court found that it was not in the best interests of children to be returned to Ireland despite unlawful removal to Poland back in 2016. Mark, it's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the case of INRE J and K, child abduction and what is in the best interests of the children, and it's a decision of Ms. Justice Gearty.
Yeah, there have been a couple of decisions like this, and obviously it's extremely difficult. This, where one parent takes the children to another country without the consent of the original parent. In this case, the children were unquestionably removed unlawfully, and the general requirement of the Hague Convention is that they be returned to Ireland to the place of habitual residence in order to determine what should happen. And but in this case, by the time the matter came for hearing, despite the fact that the respondent had really a fairly poor track record in terms of complying with court orders, they felt that the children, their family connections in Poland. They spoke Polish. They were just, Poland was the place that they really called home by this stage. So notwithstanding that the removal had been unlawful, Miss Justice Gearty held that it was appropriate for them to remain in Poland.
So I suppose what's in the interest of the children was
exactly,
the primary consideration. Okay, back shortly with Joe Brolly.
Clio, the most recommended cloud-based legal software used by 150,000 lawyers worldwide. Want to streamline case management, automate tasks including your client intake process and billing, while supported by a team of people 24/5. Visit clio.com/IE.
Silence in the Fifth Court.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. We are here in Lawler's Hotel in beautiful Naas, County Kildare, at the Solicitors Growth Summit. And we'd very much like to thank the Solicitors Growth team. That's Catherine Tobin, Martin Lawler, and Flor McCarthy. And regular listeners to the podcast will know that we had a very interesting interview with Flor McCarthy some time ago, which is still available. But we are here, myself and Peter, to interview the great Joe Brolly, who will be known to most people here, I think. Well-known GAA star, GAA commentator, columnist for the Irish Independent, and also a barrister. And because this is a legal affairs podcast, Joe, I'm disappointed to have to tell you, we are going to ask you a little bit about legal affairs. But we thought we'd start by just asking, you grew up in Derry, obviously, you went to school in Armagh, and then you chose to come south to Trinity to study law. Why law?
Well, I mean, I just really stumbled into the law. It wasn't that I had any great experience, sort of Nelson Mandela-like experience that would have said, well, look, this is for me, I'm going to change
You've no great human rights passion from where you've grown up, or did that develop?
No, but I had a very strong sense of, right, I grew up in Dungiven, and the troubles were... My mother, I was born on the 25th of June, 1969, and my mother always says I started the troubles. because 2 weeks later, the first person was killed in the troubles in Dungiven. He was battened to death during an Orange March in Dungiven. Robert McCluskey, and he was a 67-year-old bachelor who'd come into town to have a glass of Guinness in McGrennell's and have his hair cut in Seamus Doran's. And he was murdered in the doorstep of Hassan's draper shop, who was one of the last master drapers in Ireland, and became very famous because he could fist the old leather ball over the bar from the 45. This is true. And nothing ever happened. No one was questioned. No one was charged. And very quickly we appreciated, obviously I was very young, that we were in a deeply dysfunctional society, And when you're young, it was very exciting, the riots. I mean, our house was turned upside down. The British Army were habitués of number 4 Station Road, Dungiven. My father was very quickly interned, and the whole community, formed into a sort of a nuclear community that was them and us, and it was just the normal. I mean, I can remember the TV license man having his van burned down. He came in, he was taken out of the van, told never to come back to Dungiven because he was coming out from Limavady Council. Okay, and his van was burned out. And so very quickly you had that, and that was your reality, you see, so you couldn't really...
So you grew up in what you described as a dysfunctional background, but in the mid-90s, you go back to Belfast, you're a barrister. You obviously are seeing the legal system from a different side. Were you seeing it as more or less dysfunctional once you actually start appearing in the courts? Because the troubles are still going on at that stage.
Yeah, well, so I went to Trinity and then I came north. The only reason really that I left Dublin was because I was playing for Derry, and my dream was to win, because I thought that would be the be-all and the end-all. It was like the milk and honey that's promised, to the Mujahideen, that you will live in this paradise if you win in All-Ireland. And there I'm standing in the shower.
I have, Joe.
Sure, it worked.
I'm there, I'm standing...
Can I just come in there for a second, just before that, and we will get to your career in going back to Belfast. But coming down to Trinity as an 18-year-old from Dungiven, as you say, What was that like? I mean, we have a Taoiseach now, a new Taoiseach, who has talked about, and he caused a bit of controversy recently, saying that people in the South these days might be more familiar with London or Berlin than they are with Derry or Belfast. This is a recent sort of issue.
Yeah.
But I'm just you growing up in the Troubles and then coming down to Trinity. What was that like?
Well, you can take the man out of Greystones, but can you take Greystones out of the man?
Well, there you go. Maybe you can't.
And,
but you're
right. I mean, I came down and I would have been very militaristic, extremely Republican as far as we were concerned. You know, if British soldiers were being bombed and shot, as people in my own town did. I mean, there were some atrocious murders of young police officers, etc. And as far as we were concerned in our community, well, that was part and parcel of what was going on. And we were on the good team and they were on the bad team. You know, this was a colonial power who was oppressing us and all that sort of thing. And so when I came to Trinity...
1987?
Yeah. I mean, my fellow students in Trinity marvelled at how primitive I was. And you could see, like, this is not going to wash very quickly. And also another thing which was very unusual was that very quickly you were debating with people of your own age. I'd never had that experience before, you know, because we were just on the good team. This was the way things were. You know, people that you knew were shot. Your relatives were involved in this. I mean, the captain of the Dungiven hurling team died on hunger strike, Kevin Lynch. I mean, he was 23 years of age. And so this was our reality. So you went to Trinity and all of a sudden these things were being teased out. You know, ideas of republicanism, of murdering other human beings. And so very quickly in that atmosphere, because Trinity is very, very multicultural. I mean, I remember when I came to Trinity, one of the first things I saw was a fella coming walking across the front square singing Strauss. On his own, at night. He's going, what the fuck is this? And so that
So you joined in?
that broadening of experience, which, I mean, for me, it was exhilarating and also then, you know, embarrassing to start with because I was embarrassing myself in these debates. And then you very quickly learn to think about things and to look around the corners.
And you were studying law,
Well, studying, you know.
which you were signed up for law.
It was 6 hours a week. It was 6 hours a week in Trinity.
I think we should point out, what I'm sure a lot of people heard recently, that Mary McAleese in the Late Late Show described you as her most outstanding student. You must have had some kind of an aptitude for law.
Mary's, you know, that's... I don't think that accorded with reality. I think that Mary was very fond of me and like a lot of people enjoy that sort of personality and worth, but as a legal scholar, I think that was an exaggeration. I mean, I remember she used to bring her students down to, whenever I was in Belfast practicing, and she came to the Institute of Professional Legal Studies. She would always bring her students, and if I was doing a trial or anything like that, she would park them there for the week, which was always great fun, because a trial is great fun. I mean, a trial is the reality that you conjure for the jury. You know, the law, as Rumpole famously said, is only when you are in severe danger. and so what attracted me more than anything was the sense of right and wrong and the art of persuasion. You know, so I used to watch Columbo religiously to pick up the tricks.
Didn't we all, Mark? Can I just ask one sporting question? 1993, I was in Croke Park for the famous semi-final against the poor old Dubs. Winning the All-Ireland, and in terms of your legal career, was that a big thing in Belfast? I mean, was the city divided down the middle? Half them knew what you'd done, half didn't. How did that play out?
My immediate feeling was that it was a terrible anticlimax. I'm standing in the shower. I can still remember with Fergal McCusker, my closest friend. We were in the shower, and I can remember saying to him, "Is this it? You know, is this it?" You know, in those days there was no big deal. Like, we walked out. We walked up Clonliffe Road. We walked up to the Cat and Cage. We were in having pints with Dublin supporters.
Well, that was the semi-final, of course. With Cork, you beat in the final, wasn't it?
Yeah, but even after
Yeah.
the semi-final. But after the final, the sense of anticlimax was dreadful. I can remember thinking, because I had this childlike notion in my head that once this was won, this would be a new life. This would be, you know, this would be endless womanizing. It would be, you know, without consequence.
And was there not?
Cheery, endless womanizing. I mean, you would be lauded wherever you went to. And very quickly, you realized, well, you know what now? And the law was perfect for me because particularly then, it was ding-dong in the middle of the Troubles. All the courts in the Crumlin Road were going every day. There were 7 courts going flat out. Then, you know, you had your jury trials down in Town Hall Street. And that was war as well, then. Because, you know, whether you were in the magistrates' court where, I mean, I'll tell you one of my favourite stories about, you know, clients are saying to you, I think you should ask this question, you know, or I think you should, you know. Philip Breen, young solicitor. In those days, you see, say you could Ballymurphy in West Belfast, right? It was just warfare. A police officer couldn't go in there. The army couldn't go in there. You know, there were snipers. There would be fist fights. You know, if young fellas could get close enough to the army or the police, there'd be fist fights. And everybody was being charged with assault on the police and, you know, disorderly behaviour and all. And assault on the police actually is a very technical offence, assaulting a police officer in the execution of his duty. And the great Pascal O'Hare, who represented the Gibraltar Three, and was a very renowned, who had been from an SDLP background, highly respected jurist. And he always briefed this guy, Duncan O'Neill, who had the most delicate legal mind. You know, a brilliant, brilliant guy, whose own father, J.B. O'Neill, was a very famous lawyer in the north. And Duncan O'Neill talked like that, you know, and he smoked Galway's Bleu and drank pink gin, you know, when nobody did. And he thought about the law all the time. That's what Duncan did. He thought about the law.
Like all of us here.
There you go. And Pascal O'Hare had a big IRA client who was charged with assaulting the police in the magistrates' court. And he asked Duncan as a favour if he would appear for him. But he said, no problem whatsoever, old man, you see. And Philip Breen was a very young solicitor who was appearing for the co-accused. And Breen told me the story. And normally you would go in there and you would do what we would call in those days the black bastards defence. We say, officer, are you the same officer who was beating Catholics off the Garvey Road last July? You know, is it true that you called my client a Fenian bastard? I put it to you that you called him a Fenian bastard, et cetera, et cetera. You see, that's the black bastards defence. And Philip was going in. Duncan was a very renowned advocate. And Duncan said to Philip had no experience. And he said, I have a very good legal point, old man. He said, just follow it behind me. He said, I should be all right, you see. And so the first witness gave evidence, the first police officer, and Duncan said, I have no questions, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Neill. The second witness, second cop, gave evidence. I have no questions for this witness. Thank you very much, Mr. And Breen couldn't stick it after the second witness. He had had enough. Third witness, he gets up and he says, Officer, I put it to you that you said to my client, you Republican bastard. And I know your uncle as well. And we didn't right to shoot him, et cetera, et cetera. You see, and the whole temperature goes up and everything goes up, and Duncan's sitting there, you see. And anyway, after about 3 more witnesses, this ends. And then Duncan said, I have an application for Your Worship. And he's saying, so what's that? He said, well, of course, there's been no proof in this case that the officer was acting in the execution of his duty. What you'd look at Welby and the chief constable, it said, his hands up the authorities, and Bamford said, this must be right, Miss Waters. This must be right. And she said, I wasn't aware of those authorities. I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to have to acquit these men, and with some regret, I'm going to have to dismiss the charges against you, you see. And Philip Breen's walking out of court, and Duncan O'Neill's client came over to him and said, thank fuck you were in there, my barrister was fucking useless. Which was an early example to me that,
yes,
you know, when a client starts to advise you about a case, it's time to take your wig and gown off and say, well, there you go.
You obviously enjoy I've heard you talk about this before, the theatre of the court. Is that what interests you more than the legal aspect, or is it a combination of the two?
Well, I mean, sometimes they dovetail.
Of course.
I mean, a bugbear of mine is how we manage to not speak plainly in court. There are some things to admire about America. I mean, many things not, obviously. But one of the things that they're brilliant at is plain speaking. I mean, Barack Obama will talk about a bunch of folks. I was talking to a bunch of folks last week, you know, and they were making the point about Iran that, you know, and for a jury practitioner, somebody like me particularly, it's perfect. Because I can just bypass the judge altogether, you know, and there's the jury, and you can, as I said earlier, create this world, because obviously in front of judges, in front of, the Court of Appeal, for example, or judicial review, it's a very different forum, very different discipline. That idea of persuasion and the emotions that govern people. I mean, let's say, for example, yesterday, and Mark has been, and I've said this to you, so I'm not just saying it now, Mark has covered himself in glory as one of the lead counsel for the coroner's team in the course of the Stardust inquest, which is like any case, but particularly this sort of case, it's part law. There's been a lot of law and a very complex law, but part, and the most important part, therapeutic for these families in this whole area where the fire had the effect of an atom bomb, So, one of my clients, her parents both died in the blaze, and her life, she became a drug addict in due course, went to care homes. She wrote a book about it, Stardust. And so a lot of what has happened over the last year has been therapeutic, a community being treated with respect, and with proper respect. And yesterday I thought the scene was incomparable. And these are the sorts of things that interest me about what we do, which I'm very privileged to do. I mean, if you're at our end of the business where you're getting the best cases and I I do murder trial after murder trial after murder trial, pick and choose the most interesting cases. Yesterday, we were waiting for the jury verdict, and as Mark will tell you, there was no room anywhere. The place was packed. And logical and forensic as we are, you can feel that other part of yourself that you don't really have much control over. And I could feel myself, at 54 years of age, becoming extremely emotional as it sort of led to the jury foreman giving his verdict and watching everything, trying to clock everything. And the excitement and dread that was there, and the families and all their loved ones, and the media scrum. And it seemed like an eternity before the jury foreman was finally asked, because the coroner, as she must do, goes through all of the technical questions, first of all, for 48 people. And then she comes to the verdict and she says, "What is your verdict?" And he said, "Unlawful killing." And it was like a primal, a terrifying roar that just came out of nowhere. And I could feel the tears starting to come down my face. And I could see a lot of counsel, veteran counsel, weeping at this, at the enormity of this. That outside your logic part of being a human being. And that's what interests me about the law. I mean, whenever I hear, you say, okay, court 14, Mr. Brolly, court 14, and you open the door and the court's packed and it's some big trial that's about to start. Are you ready to commence, Mr. Brolly? That's what interests me.
You've obviously practiced most of your career in Belfast. You've now, I think you're practicing a little bit more in this jurisdiction, and not just in the case you just...
We don't call it this jurisdiction.
Well, this part of the island, shall we say.
Partitionist bastard. We used to have a coach at Queen's University, and when we were playing a Sigerson match against anywhere else in the country, you see, so he would say, when we were in those days, you'd have the whole military, you'd have the whole military fortifications on every border crossing. So, and as soon as we'd go over the border, he would say, "Gentlemen, stand up, look out, they're the bastards that deserted us in 1921.
But it is a serious question, Joe. You operate primarily in the north, but you're increasingly, obviously you've worked in media down south, and we know you from RTE, The Sunday Game, and you have a podcast, etc., which is based in Dublin. But in terms of the practice north of the border and south of the border, is it very different in your experience?
Well, I'd like to work a lot more down here. And I really don't find, though, with my practice, Mark will probably tell you I have a very individual approach to advocacy and all of that. I find it doesn't really matter where I was. Like if somebody said to me, "Look, we've got a really good murder trial in Italy," and
the same principles will apply.
No, I wouldn't really care what the principles were.
Just do your...
You know, I would be excited about that and I would say, yes, absolutely.
But what about the fact?
Because I don't think that the art of persuasion changes.
But,
I mean, obviously, the big advantage of practicing somewhere for a good while is that you know all the judges, and eventually you get to my age, and you were friends with the judges and worked with them or against them before they became judges, and that gives you an enormous advantage in all sorts of ways. But the differences between the two jurisdictions, I think, are minimal. The Constitution makes a big difference here. You know, there are certain guarantees that we don't have in the North. You know, but
the Human Rights Act is a very significant piece of legislation.
Yeah, massive.
Yeah, and that's led to...
Well, it underpinned the Stardust.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And Phoenix Law, because they were your instructing solicitors for the purposes of the Stardust inquest. They are doing increasingly, a lot of work in the South, aren't they? And they've kind of been brought in. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are going off looking for them
I'll tell you
to represent them down here, so to speak?
Because there's not a lazy bone in their body. And another thing is this, like we found in the North, this was a sort of a rule of thumb in the North, the loyalist paramilitaries always came to us because they didn't trust their establishment solicitors who were, they thought, quite rightly, often, in cahoots with the establishment, the police. Whereas you come to our sorts of firms and our background, and it was, as I described it once, I think, whenever the council delivered the Christmas tree, it was the last Christmas tree that was delivered to Dungiven, and they put the lights on the Christmas tree, and the people went up and set the Christmas tree on fire. It was a giant fuck you to the state. And that's what the loyalist paramilitaries knew they would get when they came to all of these firms of these boys who were educated after the 1957 Education Act allowed us to get free education. And you had these people coming through who were believers, who were devotees, who didn't believe at all in the state, and who would fight tooth and nail for everything that they got. And what you see with the Phoenix Law kids, who are all workaholics, they're all from South Armagh, places like that, that we all used to joke about, Cross McGlenn, the sniper at work, all that stuff. These young, I described them as, young Republican Mormons. and they're all workaholics.
Serious work ethic, yeah.
I mean, what they're like. I mean, if it requires an act of the Oireachtas, well, look, let's spend 3 days without sleeping writing an act for the Oireachtas, going to the politicians and making sure, this is not a joke, they actually did this. I mean, acts of the Oireachtas were enacted to allow this inquest to proceed in the way that it did. And so people go to them because they know that, and I have to say I marvel at them, that their capacity for, things that we would just go like, oh my God, could you be bothered with that at 10 o'clock at night? They're ringing you saying, here, can you look at this? And then they get an opinion from an English QC because they've discovered that he's the right QC for European law. And no stone is left unturned.
To go back to the question that led you to accusing me of being a partitionist, which
I apologize for that.
I was leading towards being an integrationist because I was wondering, do you see, obviously people are talking about the potential of referendums coming up in relation to United Ireland and that kind of thing. And obviously it's been suggested by a lot of people that there ought to be a little bit of preparation for the possibility of such a referendum. Do you see work that is necessary to be done in order to integrate our legal systems? Is work being done, or do you, as somebody who's practiced both sides of the border, see work that needs to be done?
I think the integration of the legal systems is simple, because, I remember in Trinity, I think it was Kader Asmal who said, the normal practice, the great Kader Asmal, the great South African jurist who was part of Nelson Mandela's first unity government, he was my international law tutor. And a brilliant guy, very funny too. And he used to say, it's brilliant being on a criminal law commission in the South because all you do is photocopy the legislation from Britain and change some of the wording. And I think that our systems are so close to each other that's not an issue. The real issue is whether there's a political will to start doing that. And I think that the problem now is, ironically, that the rise of Sinn Féin is putting the brakes on that, because it's a bit like Sinn Féin swept the SDLP away with the Good Friday Agreement. I think John Hume knew himself that he was signing his own death warrant with it, because young people were going to necessarily attach to the glamour and excitement and euphoria of Sinn Féin and the United Ireland Project and all those sorts of things. And I think that's probably an existential threat now for Fianna Fáil, which is why Simon Harris, Micheál Martin are saying, well, yes, of course, we would welcome unification and we're interested, but now is not the right time, and it's certainly not a priority at the moment. When in fact, what we would need to be doing is putting the nuts and bolts together now, because it is going to be a very long-term project. I mean, clearly, the British want out. There's no doubt about that. You know, very quickly, the demographic is changing.
But Joe,
so that, you know, the natural progression is towards a vibrant, unified state in Europe again, the Euro, North and South, and all of the great sort of benefits that would bring from, you know, the amelioration of the corporation tax rate, American involvement,
what
European.
About your colleagues in the Unionist bar, for example, in the North? I mean, obviously, you're up and down the whole time, and you know what it's like, and a lot of your colleagues will be the same. But there will be a big coterie of barristers and representatives. As you say, I'm a legal representative. Give me a brief, and I'll represent. It doesn't matter where I am in one way.
Yeah.
But is that an issue? Do you have colleagues up there who just, I mean, you know, Dundalk is a foreign land. They just don't cross the border. They don't know anything about it. And for them, that transition might be too much.
Well, Dundalk's a foreign land for everybody. To be fair. I mean, if you're from, I apologise to anybody who's from Dundalk. But, I mean, the Protestant bar is a very middle-class bar. You know, it's a very rugby, Ireland, Ulster, very non-sectarian, like very non-sectarian, as is the judiciary. Once you're moving in those circles, people are interested in the bottom line. How does this benefit us? You know, how is it going to work in terms of our health service? All those sorts of things. And with the DUP now locked in to the actual politics, don't forget that the Good Friday Agreement, the miracle of the Good Friday Agreement was that it switched off the violence so quickly. I mean, it was astonishing. I mean, overnight, really it was gone. I mean, you get the very odd incident like the Mary McAleese shooting, things like that, which are born really of ghettoism, not of any movement. You know, so the first phase was to shut down the violence. It was the most spectacularly successful peace process, I think, in the history of the modern world. And Stormont was very cleverly set up to make sure that people who'd never met each other. I mean, my father was an MLA in Stormont, and the first time I went up, I couldn't believe it. I was going up for organ donation, and I was meeting Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, who were very, very friendly. You know, texting each other about Chelsea and Manchester United, and you know. And I mean, Peter would never have it was like Ian Paisley Senior, the same thing, you know. And you break down those barriers by meeting each other. The first time I went up, some of the journalists were there, and my father was there, and he said, we'll go down to the canteen for a cup of tea, and I could not believe it. All of the DUP sat in their own corner. Those tables were for the DUP. They didn't speak to anyone else. You know, and it was a very pointed sort of reminder that the only way that sectarianism can fester is if people are kept apart. And you see what's happening on the ground in the North, and we see this with the DUP. Eventually they were forced to come back in because their own constituents are saying, okay, well, we're going to vote for the Alliance. So, I mean, look at the Alliance at the last election, which is a very non-denominational, you know, very non-sectarian. I mean, 3 gay MLAs, you know, who I interviewed for that series in the Independent, you know. I mean, Andrew Muir with his bow tie on, and you know, his sort of outrageousness and all of that. And so the DUP had to come on board, because what's happening at ground level is that my son is now a season ticket holder at Dundela in the 2nd division of the Irish League. I mean, his grandfather would be turning in his grave. And so what you see is that movement together. It's a very small society. There's only 1.5 million people in the North. And as that happens, the politicians are coming with it. And now we're into the new phase, which is that the old DUP is now Jim Allister and Jamie Bryson. They're the ones now who are no surrender. And Emma Little-Pengelly, who again is a player. She's a very modern, very pragmatic person. She's a barrister. She's now with Michelle O'Neill, enjoying the fruits of this. Oh, President Biden, nice to see you, President. And living in that world. So now we've been sort of socialized by the first 20-year phase. Yep. Now we're going to move into the political phase.
Mark, if I could just ask Joe in relation to that. I mean, I know we're kind of straying into politics, but this is very interesting. I know you recently commented on, there was a report from ESRI where they talked about a 20 billion...
Oh, the EEIA.
We won't get into that. Yeah. And I know you had strong views in relation to that. But just as a border fox crossing over back and forth and being in both jurisdictions, if we can use that phrase, on a regular basis. Border poll happens 5 years, 10 years. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? What do you expect?
Well, I think the establishment parties now in the South can only soft pedal on it for so long, because as the economic case for it intensifies, because that's really the big thing. I mean, the North has been a colony of the United Kingdom. It's been entirely neglected. We can't move to a 12.5% corporation tax rate. We're not in the euro. All of the things that the majority of the people in the North want. So as soon as I expect that, regardless of the fear-mongering, because I think it only is fear-mongering. I mean, the most sort of, the most comprehensive research suggests that the actual subvention to start with will be about 2.8 billion per annum, which is, it's nothing. But think of the and that's without modelling the economic benefits. Because the North's got a very educated population. I think we're slightly behind the South.
Do you think people will vote for it?
I think people will, because, who wants to vote for what's going on in the UK at the moment? I think that people are very disenchanted with that and frightened by that as well. The inhumanity of it, the cruelty, which isn't a feature of life in the North. Genuinely, it isn't. I mean, you look behind the rhetoric of the DUP, which has completely changed since the agreement, and you see that we have a very, very moral Presbyterian core in the North. Very moral Church of Ireland, very moral Presbyterian core, very decent people, and a very strong sense of community. And I just think that we're now very quickly starting to move away from the bogeyman of a united Ireland, and people are starting to see...
Are you suggesting that the Christian denominations that apparently drove people apart are actually likely to bring them back together?
No, I'm suggesting that there is a strong sense of community in the North. I mean, Belfast has the lowest rate of domestic crime in any city in Western Europe now. You never see a crime there. It's a very peaceful place. Obviously we've got some ghetto areas where we need economic regeneration. But I think that it's inevitable that all of that's going to happen because nothing else makes any sense.
Now, unfortunately, Joe, I've been given the sign that we need to finish up, and we didn't tip you off to the question we always ask our guests, but I'll just see if you have anything for us. Do you have a book or a film you'd like to recommend to the listeners of The Fifth Court?
It doesn't have to be a legal book.
It certainly doesn't have to be a legal book, just something you'd recommend.
Yeah. If you've never read it before, I recommend The Fight by Norman Mailer. It is one of the most incredible pieces of writing.
Is that The Rumble in the Jungle?
Rumble in the Jungle, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not really about that. It sort of mirrors the Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's.
Fantastic.
And it's incomparable. I mean, the first paragraph is matchless. It is always a shock to see him in the flesh again.
Yeah.
The world's most beautiful athlete, for then the language of camp is doomed to appear.
Fantastic.
And I mean, it's so... The Fight by Norman Mailer.
Fight by Norman Mailer. Fantastic.
Mark,
thanks.
Have we got any questions? I just see you're looking at a...
Do we
yeah, please.
Some questions in Menti here. Joe, why do you think Trinity Gaelic footballers fared better after you graduated?
I'm not sure that that's true.
Were they inspired by your
We threw away a Sigerson. I mean, we had a great group.
Did you win a Sigerson?
Pat Gilroy stayed on, did he?
Pat Gilroy played. We had a great group. We came up from Division 2 to Division 1. We won Division 1 3 years in a row. We lost to Sigerson by a point. I was through, clean through on goal in atrocious weather. And I can remember thinking, this is it, it's over, game's over. And I hit the Queen's goalie in the face with the ball. It actually hit him in the face, knocked him backwards, and the ball bounced out. We lost by a point. That's the if somebody said to me, is there anything in your life that you regret? This is not a joke. This is not a joke. That is, to this day, the thing that I feel there, because I felt, that it was taken away from us. It was my fault and it was taken away from us.
Joe, another one. What learnings can the GAA take from Leinster Rugby selling out Croke Park in 36 hours?
Well, I think go multinational, bring in very highly paid people from New Zealand and South Africa, play 6 games a year, No, I think that it's not a comparison that's relevant because the GAA is a community organisation, which has the odd big game. Like tomorrow night I'm going to Derry, Donegal, Celtic Park, 15,000 sellout there, which is perfect for us. But the GAA is the 300,000 members in the country.
Yeah, and it's all throughout the country.
Rugby has become, since the end of the amateur era, a brilliant spectator sport. So everybody goes in to watch. It's like watching the FA Cup final, but it is a spectator sport now.
Yeah.
And so you have that false sort of...
So it's apples and oranges. You're not comparing the same.
Exactly.
When unity happens, will it be a unitary state, or will the North still retain some form of assembly, in your opinion?
Well, one of the suggestions that I had was that we might start with essentially a confederacy where you'd continue to have a parliament in the North. But I think that the pace of change is so swift in people's minds, that as the heat has gone out of the sectarianism in the North, like my children wouldn't know anything about the Troubles. I can remember... my old boy did the H-Block song, and I'll wear no convict's uniform nor meekly serve my time. And I can remember on TG4, this documentary came on, our Ewan, who was on the blanket, my uncle Ewan, my father's brother, down to about maybe 7 stone on the blanket. And the opening strain of the documentary, my son Rory said to me, "Is that Uncle Ewan?" I says, "Oh, no. My son, fucking turn over to the fucking Teletubbies, Jesus, absolutely not. And you think about it my first son was born in 2000, and you go back to 1994, one of the bloodiest years of the Troubles. Like, you were going into Belfast city centre, and they had turnstiles in the city centre, and wardens with Alsatian dogs. You were searched coming through, and an Alsatian dog jumped up and down, and in that space of time, so you can imagine these two communities that were completely segregated, and now this coming together all over the North. And so I think that the pace of change is going to be, it's accelerating all the time. When you see Emma Little Pengelly with a hurling stick in St. Paul's on the Shaws Road, just up from Casebook Park where the corporals were murdered, one of the grisliest murders of the Troubles, and being welcomed in the St. Paul's Club, which was, it would have been a focal point of the Republican movement up there. That things are hurtling forwards.
Thank you here to Joe for the work you've done and continue to do for Cystic Fibrosis Ireland. Very much appreciated. Joe, will you feel the love for Mickey if Derry wins the All-Ireland?
Wow, there's a question for you, Joe.
That's a loaded question.
Did it take Mickey?
We're all part of the same hypocrisy. Rory Gallagher has been the manager of Derry. He has created an astonishing system of play. The players have gone from Division 4 to Division 1. He, along with Jimmy McGuinness, was the co-inventor of shit football. And we see the results of that with the Derry team. I cannot reconcile myself to Mickey being the manager. I can't have it. I think that he's the worst sort of hypocrite. Who was, castigating people from Tyrone who were going managing other club teams about their disloyalty. Jumps at whenever he's pushed from Tyrone, he goes to Louth. And then he's meeting the Louth players to discuss their plans for the coming season because he always loved Louth so much. This is my dream job. It's always been my dream to manage Louth. And then, overnight, in a dream, God came to him again, and now it's his dream job to manage Derry. For 100,000 a year.
But I
do not have to accept that. Obviously, I support our lads, and I'll be there tomorrow. We're meeting in the Watty Graham's Club, the home of the All Ireland Club champions, and all our friends will be there, and all the Derry players I played with, and we'll go to the game, and we'll support our boys to the. But I will not. I will not include Mickey Hart in any of that.
I think we can take it that that's a no, folks.
Yeah, no.
You know, tell us what you really think.
Yeah.
Listen, there's only one more observation that has been made here, which is that when you talked about, you couldn't get womanizing after 1993, the observation is, look, wasn't Copperface Jack around at that time? Were you not aware of it, Joe?
Obviously wasn't doing it right.
You weren't doing it right. You need to take lessons from Larry O'Gorman, the famous Wexford hurler, who got caught out making an observation one time about the level of womanising after the one time that Wexford won in All-Ireland in the last 40 years. I'll tell you about it later. Yes. OK, thank you very much, folks.
Well done, Joe. Great.
The Fifth Court will adjourn until next week.
And that's all from this edition of The Fifth Court. We hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you to Barrister Joe Brolly. Mark, it was a wonderful occasion, wasn't it?
We filled the house.
Great
crack. And certainly he had a lot of fun fielding our questions.
Yes, absolutely. And he doesn't hold back, which is just wonderful. Before I go, I'd like to say a big thank you to our producer, Conal O'Moroyne, and to Peter Rice of the Dublin South Podcast Studios for his wonderful work in recording this show. So from me, Peter Leonard.
Myself, Mark Tottenham.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon in The Fifth Court.